What could be more frightening than the idea of a serial killer, a person who lives in our midst and kills for sport? We're somewhat reassured when we see a pattern emerging, a method to his madness. If we don't fit his victim profile, we know we're safe. But suppose there is no pattern. Suppose his choices are truly random. Suppose any of us, anyone at all, could be next.
December 1968, just outside of San Francisco, California. The summer of love was about to turn into the winter of fear. It was around 7 o'clock on Friday, December 20th, when 17-year-old David Faraday picked up 16-year-old Betty Lou Jensen for a first date.
You know, she was only 16, I think, and it was the first time that she was allowed to date. Apparently, what they told their parents was that they were going to go to a Christmas play or something at their high school. But they ended up going out to a place on the outskirts of Vallejo. It's just kind of a place that people go to be alone, kind of a lover's lane.
Few passers-by could see the couple parked in the secluded area.
It was 22 degrees or so and very cold, and there's no lights anywhere out there. Even today, it's just pitch black.
David and Betty Lou were sitting in the car talking when a man approached wielding a gun.
He literally herded them from the car by walking around firing bullets into it to get David Faraday to come out the specific side that he wanted. He chased Betty Lou Jensen down that country road and shot her dead center.
The boy was shot once in the head, and Betty Lou Jensen was shot 5 times in the back. They weren't robbed, there was no sexual molestation, and it didn't appear to be a rage killing. So it appeared to be just killing for the joy of killing.
Betty Lou died at the scene. David Faraday died on his way to the hospital. Police scoured the crime scene for clues. From shell casings, they knew the killer had fired at least 10 rounds, but nothing more substantial came from the investigation.
From that night, 1968, until just after midnight on July 5th, 1969, there were no leads. I mean, the detectives were doing the basics, but it was just like a hit.
6 months later, Saturday, July 4th, 1969, just before midnight, 23-year-old Darlene Ferrin and Mike Mageau, 19, pulled into a small recreation area in Vallejo, California, located 2 miles from the site of the December killings.
They were just talking, and a stranger pulled up. And apparently drove away and then came back a few minutes later. He parked again behind the couple. He used a flashlight and approached them from the passenger side. The couple thought that it was a police officer. They got their ID ready. And then they were shot multiple times.
As we arrived, we saw a vehicle, a brown 65 Corvair was here. We saw a body laying on the ground. This door was open. The body was about right here. Michael Mageau, the white male victim, had obviously been shot. He'd been shot up in the head area, looked through his neck, his mouth was shot. His knee had been shot, and he had bullet wounds in his back.
Darlene had been shot 9 times in the arm and the chest.
She was still alive. She was breathing. Her eyes flickered a little bit. And I asked her if she could tell me what happened, and she appeared to look at me and try to say something, but it only came out as a moaning sound.
At 12:38 a.m., Farron and Majot were taken by ambulance to the nearest hospital. 2 minutes later, at 12:40, police received a call from an unidentified man.
He described where the kids were to be found, and he described the weapon, and then he said that he was responsible for the other shootings. And then he said goodbye in a very taunting way.
Darlene Farron died before reaching the hospital. Majot, however, survived and described the suspect to police. In the ensuing investigation, police learned that a mysterious man had recently been seen lurking around Darlene's apartment.
Darlene seemed to be the focus of the attack. I mean, Mike was shot, but she was shot 3 times more.
Nearly a month passed with little progress for investigators. Then, 3 weeks after the second attack, 3 newspapers in the San Francisco Bay Area each received a letter.
This is the murderer of the 2 teenagers last Christmas at Lake Herman and the girl on the 4th of July.
I was brought into the Zodiac case mainly because I was a witness, in a sense. I was sitting in the letters to the editor's office. We began to get these bizarre letters.
The letters contained information about each crime, including the brand name of the ammunition and the number of shots fired. Information only the killer could know. They all ended with a symbol, a circle with an overlying cross. But the letters also contained something else.
Each letter contained 1/3 of a cryptogram that apparently, according to the person writing the letters, that if the cryptogram or the cipher could be decoded, it would have his identity in there.
His threat was that you had to publish these or he was going to go around and shoot people. And the papers did.
The message, coded with Navy semaphores, Greek signs, Morse code, and letters of the alphabet, stumped police.
The military couldn't decode it, nobody could decode it, and the CIA, nobody. Finally, after a lot of work, it was decoded by a school teacher. But the shooter's identity was still a mystery.
I like killing people because it's so much fun. It's more fun than killing wild game in the forest, because man is the most dangerous animal of all to kill.
His note did not give his name as he had promised.
I will not give you my name, because you'll try to slow down or stop my collecting of slaves for afterlife.
At this point, police suspected they were dealing with a serial killer who would keep on killing.
They thought it could be somebody that maybe got these details out of the newspapers. So they asked for more details, and within a week, the person wrote again, and this time he gave himself a nickname. He called himself Zodiac. And he started listing more information about the 2 shootings in Vallejo. At that point, it became pretty obvious that this was the guy that had done the shootings.
Again, the letter was signed with a crossed circle.
The first letters were mailed on July 31st, and then within a week there was another letter. And then there was no activity. There was no attacks, no letters were written.
Until 2 months later, when the Zodiac surfaced again and changed his method of attack. It was a late September Saturday afternoon in 1969. 22-year-old Cecilia Ann Shepard and 20-year-old Brian Hartnell were having a picnic at Lake Berryessa in Napa County, just 40 miles north of Vallejo.
Waiting for the sun to go down, they saw a person within a couple hundred yards wearing dark clothing. He would disappear and then come back into their sight.
He had put on this disguise. It was kind of like an executioner's costume. And it was bizarre. That's something that not a lot of people do. I mean, you know, even serial killers, you don't see them dressing up like that. He was very well prepared.
He had a scabbard, probably a bayonet that was in it, that he had hand decorated with brads, and his gun in a holster on the other side. His hood was an old executioner's hood, like they wore in the Middle Ages. It was square, which is very unusual, came down over his shoulders, and had the Zodiac symbol across it, which was a crossed white circle on a black background.
He approached them before it was dark. And he showed them that he had a gun. He seemed to be stalling for some reason. And he allowed a conversation to take place. I believe it lasted for about a half an hour.
He told them that he had escaped from a prison in Montana and that he needed their car to go to Mexico, and he needed their wallet and their car keys. You know, if you're going to kill someone, why make up a story like that? He took their wallet and their car keys, but then he left them there when he left. If he was going to kill them, why was he wearing a mask?
His voice changed, got very husky and deep, and he said, "I'm going to have to stab you people." Brian was stabbed first, and then Cecilia was stabbed in the front and the back.
The killer left the two to die. Cecilia died 12 hours after the attack. But the killer left behind another witness. Brian Hartnell survived.
I have no malice, in my heart against him. I just don't want this to happen again to anyone else.
The Zodiac also left more evidence at the scene than in previous attacks.
The clothesline that had been used to tie them up was still there. Footprints leading from the road to the crime scene and back gave an indication not only what size they were, but also they sunk very deeply into the earth. So it gave them a very good idea on how much this guy weighed. And the male survivor was able to describe in great detail the conversation and the voice and physical characteristics.
The boy thought he wasn't going to make it. He wanted to give a description to the guy best he could. About the best he could give us, that he had a hood over his face, and he was a big guy.
Other witnesses came forward who had seen a strange man walking around the lake that day. The footprint left at the scene was a size 10.5 Windwalker shoe, military issue, mostly distributed to naval bases on the West Coast. And the killer left one more piece of distinctive evidence, a note written on the door of Brian Hartnell's car.
He had written the dates of the Vallejo murders as well as that date of the stabbing. And he had written by knife, and he had written his cross circle symbol.
We knew this was his handwriting. We were seeing the actual writing. But to take the time to do that, to leave his calling card, this is a man that's after something else.
And once again, police received a call after the attack.
I want to report a murder. No, a double murder. They're 2 miles north of park headquarters. They were in a white Volkswagen Carmen Ghia. I'm the one who did it.
I'm the one who did it. But why? And why take credit for it? San Francisco in the 60s. If you're going to San Francisco, the song said, be sure to wear some flowers in your hair. And while you're at it, how about a bulletproof vest?
Between December of 1968 and October of 1969, the Zodiac killer had attacked 3 young couples, killing 4 of his 6 victims.
In serial killer terminology, there is a phrase known as becoming. That moment when a person who has committed crimes embraces that part of themselves that is doing these terrible things. They go from being a person who kills to being a killer. In my opinion, the murder at Lake Berryessa is that. It was his becoming.
But who was he? And why was he terrorizing the people of the San Francisco Bay Area? For investigators, the stakes were getting higher.
The intervals between attacks had shortened considerably. It went from 7 months to about 2 months.
But at least they had a grasp on the Zodiac's M.O.
It appeared that this guy was just somebody that looked for couples that were by themselves, and he was killing for just the joy of it.
Until the M.O. suddenly changed.
It was a Saturday night, October 11th, 1969. Paul Stein was a 29-year-old cab driver, drove a yellow cab in San Francisco, and it appears he got flagged down at Mason and Geary Street by a male.
He instructs the cab driver to take him to the intersection of Washington and Maple.
But actually ended up stopping at Washington and Cherry Street, which is about 4 blocks away. It appears at that time that the passenger reached up and shot Mr. Stein in the right temple with a 9mm handgun. It appears that he killed him instantly. Passenger in the car got out, opened his door, reached over, took his wallet, took the car keys, tore a part of Mr. Stein's shirt off. It appeared that he was wiping down parts of the cab, possibly to remove fingerprints. And then he casually walked away.
Within seconds of the murder, the San Francisco Police Department received a call from a witness.
There were some teenagers who observed part of the action. They saw him get out of the car, reach in, do something with Mr. Stein. They didn't know what. Dispatch put out a description of a suspect, and for some reason it came out as a black male. There were some officers heading towards the scene. They actually saw a white male walking down the street, slowed down, took a look at him, but kept on driving. It's very possible that was Zodiac.
Witnesses described the killer as having short hair, horn-rimmed glasses, and a stocky build. A bloody fingerprint was found in the cab and analyzed, but never matched any suspect. At the time, police did not connect the murder with the Zodiac.
It's not unusual for cab drivers to get robbed, and occasionally they do get shot. So for the first couple days, it was treated as just that, a robbery homicide case. And then a letter was received by the Chronicle by someone claiming to be the Zodiac, taking credit for the crime.
The letter arrived 2 days after the incident. It contained the missing piece of Paul Stein's bloody shirt.
This is the Zodiac speaking. I am the murderer of the taxi driver over by Washington Street and Maple Street last night. To prove this, here's a blood-stained piece of his shirt.
The same letter contained a threat that put the city and county into an uproar.
School children make nice targets. I think I shall wipe out a school bus some morning. Just shoot out the front tires and then pick off the kiddies as they come bouncing out.
The Zodiac's threat was taken very seriously.
Most of the Napa Sheriff's Department, other agencies around, began following school buses on a daily basis.
We had airplanes following the school buses. There were armed guards. Back in the late 60s, this was something brand new. We really didn't quite know what to make of this guy.
You're not afraid?
No, I'm not.
No, not too afraid.
The attack never came. But at this point, in October 1969, police and the media were nervously awaiting another correspondence or another murder.
The fear level, I guess, would be at its highest around the time of Paul Stein, because then no one was really safe.
3 weeks after Paul Stein's murder, police received a greeting card.
This is the Zodiac speaking. I thought you'd need a good laugh before you hear the bad news.
Although police had confirmed 5 murders, the Zodiac claimed he had killed 7. And this was just the beginning of the Zodiac's game with the police.
He wasn't going to tell them anymore. He wasn't going to predict the murders. He was going to make them look like accidents. That was even worse. He had no idea.
Also within the 7-page letter was information that would not be understood until years later.
One of the pages in this letter contained a diagram of a bomb that he was going to use. And on another page was a crossed circle. And on the circumference of the circle were 5 X's.
The bomb was taken seriously, but could not be found. The symbol with X's did not seem to have any relevance to the case. It had been 10 months and 20 days since the murders of Betty Lou Jensen and David Faraday, the first murders attributed to the Zodiac. At this point, an onslaught of communications from the Zodiac to the police and the public began.
When we were working at the Chronicle, people were, after a while, on the alert for any letter, and they were easy to spot. Triple postage, rush to editor, very strange, childish kind of handwriting.
Most of the Zodiac's letters taunted police for not catching him, and the tally of murders he said he committed continued to rise. At this point, it was quite clear the Zodiac killer was using the media to get to the police. But because of the nationwide media coverage, in November of 1970, police were able to make a connection to another murder, which had occurred in 1966, just outside Los Angeles in Riverside, California. It was quite possibly the Zodiac's first victim. Her name was Sherry Jo Bates, and she was an 18-year-old college freshman. Her body was found several blocks from Riverside City College on October 30th, 1966.
She was lying face first in the dirt between two of these houses that were used to house students. Her throat had been slashed, and she'd been stabbed in the back.
A man's wristwatch was found at the crime scene, stopped at 12:23, although the time of death was determined to be between 10:30 and 10:45 that night.
30 days after Cherry Jo Bates was killed, somebody sent a typed letter titled The Confession. In this letter, the person took credit for killing Cherry Jo Bates.
I told her that my car was down the street and that I would give her a lift home. When we were away from the library walking, I said it was about time. She asked me, about time for what? I said it was about time for her to die.
Several months later, more letters arrived.
One was sent to Cherry Jo Bates' father, another was sent to the newspaper, and another was sent to the police. And they all said, Bates had to die, there will be more. Two of these notes had a little symbol down at the bottom that looks like a Z. The documents examiner for the state of California concluded that these writings were written by the same person who has been preparing the letters for the San Francisco Chronicle.
But even today, the Riverside Police Department isn't convinced.
The RPD disagreed with him. They thought that it wasn't Zodiac. At that point, they were convinced that it was a local person.
Not one to share the spotlight. In 1971, the Zodiac wrote to the Los Angeles Times.
I do have to give them credit for stumbling across my Riverside activity, but they're only finding the easy ones.
He's playing a game, isn't he? And so far, he's winning.
By the summer of 1974, 5 years since his first correspondence, the Zodiac killer had sent more than 20 letters, greeting cards, and ciphers to the press, including a postcard claiming an additional victim in Lake Tahoe, Nevada, and a map with reference to a California geographical landmark, Mount Diablo. His tally of murders committed was up to 37, but police only had enough evidence to tie 5 murders to the Zodiac killer. Then the letters that could definitively be linked to the Zodiac suddenly stopped. Forever.
The criminal genius is a type we run into far more frequently in fiction than in fact. Was Zodiac a criminal genius? That's certainly how he saw himself and how he wanted to be seen.
There are thousands of pieces of information and possible evidence linked to the case that continue to be reanalyzed and re-examined by police and others that may reveal clues to the Zodiac killer's identity. The codes the Zodiac wrote were sophisticated, exhibiting high intelligence and indicating a naval background. The Wingwalker shoe print at Lake Berryessa also pointed to a military man. In the letters, there are numerous references to the Gilbert and Sullivan operetta, The Mikado, as well as popular Hollywood movies, providing perhaps another clue.
I saw and think The Exorcist was the best satirical comedy that I have ever seen.
Even the genesis of the name Zodiac is open to interpretation. It may have come from astrology, or from a more obscure source. In the 1939 film, Charlie Chan at Treasure Island, the action takes place at a military base outside of San Francisco, and the villain is named Zodiac. Charlie Chan describes him. Dr. Zodiac, not ordinary criminal. He is man of great ego with disease known to science as pseudologia fantastica, criminal egoist who find pleasure in laughing at police. Was the Zodiac something of a mad genius, intent on creating a pattern through a carefully planned series of attacks? Or was he the stereotype of the serial killers we see in movies and on TV? A pathetic, disturbed recluse who really did think he was working on the collecting of slaves for the afterlife. Over the years, police questioned thousands of potential suspects, none of whom could be linked conclusively to the Zodiac. One of those people questioned early on was Arthur Lee Allen. Even with 2 college degrees and several years spent toward a master's degree in biology, Allen worked mainly at menial jobs. He lived in the basement of his mother's house and kept a trailer nearby.
The main reason that Allen came to the attention of the police was because 2 people came forward that said that in January of 1968, Arthur Lee Allen had told them that he was going to call himself Zodiac and that he was going to kill young couples at random, and that the murders would be very difficult for the police to solve because there'd be no motive.
Allen was questioned in 1969, but was not considered an official suspect by police. Unofficially, however, many believed he was the Zodiac.
Many of the detectives in the case that I most respect have always believed it was Arthur Lee Allen.
The footprints at Lake Berryessa were size 10.5 wing walker. Allen wore size 10.5 wing walker. The depth of the footprints implied that the person was well over 200 pounds. Allen was well over 200 pounds and about 6 feet tall. And he had the background for it. He was in the Navy. He studied code. He was a sailmaker, which he had a sewing skill, so that would explain the personalized hood that was used at Lake Berryessa. The connections are very strong.
In a police report that was written by one of the investigators investigating the Darlene Ferrin murder case, he interviewed Allen, and in that report, Allen offered the information that he had a bloody knife on his car seat that day. He offered the information that he had been a student at Riverside during the time that Sherry Jo Bates was murdered.
This guy lived 8 minutes from the first crime scene out on the outskirts of Vallejo. He lived 5 minutes from the second crime scene. He lived less than 1/10 of a mile away from where Darlene Ferrin had been working in 1967 as a waitress.
It was not until 1991, however, that police had obtained enough circumstantial evidence to order a search warrant for Allen's trailer.
Things they found, like a Zodiac ring and a lot of weapons, pipe bombs, they found a lot of stuff. These are the kind of hard facts that I don't see with the other suspects.
But nothing found in his trailer conclusively linked Allen to the Zodiac. Although questioned and suspected for years, Arthur Lee Allen denied being the killer and was never arrested for the Zodiac murders.
They haven't arrested me because they can't prove a thing. I'm not the damn Zodiac.
The Zodiac killer or victim of years of police harassment? Arthur Lee Allen took the answer to his grave.
In 1992, Allen died at the age of 58 from complications associated with diabetes.
If he's a Zodiac, he got away with it for his whole life. But there are people that swear that it was him, that know, that actually believe it was him. They just couldn't prove it.
Not one piece of physical evidence ever tied Allen to the Zodiac, including the print found in Paul Stine's taxicab.
The things that make Arthur Lee Allen look like an interesting suspect are the things that are entirely circumstantial. You know, all these stories that make it sound like it's him, when you get down to the nitty-gritty, they don't pan out.
Arthur Lee Allen. He makes a great suspect, but he's not the only one.
Could the Zodiac killer still be alive? More than 30 years after the first murder, the hunt continues.
Catch me before I kill more. One of the things we know about serial killers is that they can't stop. But this one did. Maybe he found another hobby. Maybe he turned to stamp collecting and discovered it was a lot more rewarding.
There's a lot of people out there, most of them not in law enforcement, that are convinced that they know who the Zodiac is. And there's a ton of circumstantial evidence pointing towards a few people. But obviously, they all can't be the Zodiac.
When a strange Zodiac postcard was sent to the press in 1971, retired police detective Harvey Hines found clues that he believes identify the killer.
It had a picture overpasted on the card, and the picture was an artist's rendition of a ski lodge with a person with a shovel digging a sidewalk off.
It was a picture of a condominium project that had recently been finished in Lake Tahoe, Nevada. On this postcard were pasted little phrases like "peek through the pines," and sought victim 12.
Donna Lass was a 25-year-old nurse living in Lake Tahoe, Nevada. On September 6, 1971, Lass left her place of work, never to be seen again. Her car was left at her apartment, and nothing was missing.
The only murder they thought the postcard could be making reference to was the unsolved murder of Donna Lass, which had taken place, I believe, almost half a year earlier.
Convinced that Lass was the Zodiac's victim 12. In 1973, Hines began his own investigation.
I went to Tahoe, and I questioned the people that worked with Donna Lass and asked them if there was anyone that they could remember that was odd or different than the rest of the employees. Without exception, they named Larry Kane. To them, he was a loner, he was strange, he lived with his mother.
The Zodiac profile indicated a grudge against law enforcement, as well as a military background. According to Hines, Kane fits the profile.
His criminal history, I found, dated back to 1946 and had an entry almost yearly until 1968. Larry Kane, in fact, was in the Navy Reserve in 1943, at which time he went to radio school. He was exposed to some basic semaphore signals and codes.
Hines learned that in the area of San Francisco where Kane had lived, there was a long-running production of the Mikado, which was referred to in many of the Zodiac's letters. Also, in a 1970 letter, the Zodiac indicated that a single line of code would reveal his identity. Hines believes it implicates Kane.
The four letters, K-N-E-A, spell the name Kane. And that's the only spelling you can get out of those four letters, no matter how you run them around. The circle dates to the left of the letters in a symbol merely meant to substitute the eighth letter to the left of the existing one.
Hines found that the letter M changed to an E to form the word name.
I still had a circle 8 in the symbol, the upside-down area symbol. So I felt that that was probably symbolic of the Zodiac chart or calendar. And by starting at the end and going 8 to the left was the sign of Taurus.
After concluding that the message indicated the killer's astrological sign, Hines added the 3 8s to get 24.
Well, 24 couldn't have been his age because he had been described 40 to 45 years old. So possibly it was his birth date, the year he was born.
The single line of code was written backward from right to left, providing a final clue for Hines.
Hebrew language reads from right to left, so I felt possibly this would be his ethnic background.
Hines compared the deciphered clues to information he had gathered about Larry Kane. Kane was born in 1924 under the sign of Taurus, and he was of Jewish descent.
So everything that was in the code matched Kane, the suspect, 100%.
Convinced that Donna Lass was a Zodiac victim, Hines re-examined the postcard for clues to the whereabouts of her body. He noticed a hole punched in the top right corner of the card and thought it could be a clue.
It said go past the Lake Tahoe areas, meaning ski areas, to the areas near the Sierra Club. And I felt it was in that area that we might locate her.
He discovered a strange configuration of rocks in a wooded area by the Sierra Club. The hole in the card matched this location in the woods.
What led me to this site was a circle of logs. They were 16 foot in diameter. Within the circle of logs was a square, and within the square was a triangle, and within the triangle was a 13-stone cross lying flat on the ground. All of the symbols, the circle, the square, the triangle, and the cross, were symbols that the Zodiac used in his coded messages.
Hines began digging at the site, but never did find a body.
Donna Lass's body has never been recovered, and people are still searching for it today. Harvey Hines was out there with a shovel just as recently as 3 or 4 months ago, looking for her body.
Police questioned Kane, but did not believe there was enough physical evidence to make an arrest.
So I've personally spoken to Harvey Hines as suspect. Again, the suspect we're talking about didn't make any incriminating statements. He's one of these dozen or so people that has, for whatever reason, a lot of circumstantial evidence pointing towards him. You know, there's a lot of people that fit that criteria.
Hines is not the only one studying the individual Zodiac letters, ciphers, and cards for anything that might lead to a suspect. Gareth Penn, a scholar in historical linguistics, was drawn into the Zodiac mystery when he saw a 1971 letter containing a reference to radians. A radian is a term used by engineers and mathematicians to denote the angle of 57.3 degrees.
It was rather odd that something of this nature would appear in a letter such as that written by the Zodiac. He had mentioned the word radian, which is not in the active vocabulary of 99% of the U.S. population.
By looking at every letter and murder from the radian theory, a sinister plan unfolds. Penn calls his theory the calculus of evil.
The Zodiac sent a map of the San Francisco Bay Area to police that had a crossed circle drawn over Mount Diablo, which is a mountain right there in the Bay Area. And he said that police would find something interesting if they were to place a radian angle on the peak of Mount Diablo. Apparently, nobody ever tried to find out what a radian was, and this, of course, wasn't uncovered until 1980 when Gareth Penn took it upon himself to do this test and found out that what the Zodiac was talking about was actually something that had a basis in fact. The scenes of the Blue Rock Springs shootings and the shooting of Paul Stein, when they are connected to Mount Diablo, form one radian angle.
Penn's theory may explain why the Zodiac chose to kill cab driver Paul Stein.
Well, he was looking for what you might call a sacrifice at a particular location. And the surest way to get a victim to a particular location is to hire a cab driver, because a cab driver will go wherever you want him to go for the implied promise of payment, except when they got to the end of this trip.
When the Zodiac's two attacks in Vallejo, California, Lake Herman Road and Blue Rock Springs are connected by the point where the Zodiac made his first phone call to police, an angle of 57.3 degrees appears, another perfect radian angle.
I would say that the map references in the Zodiac case are probably the most interesting clues there are, because it's the only real thing that we have that gives us any real indication of why he might have been doing these things, or at least not why, but what it meant to him.
One of the Zodiac's earlier letters had a number of X's marked onto the symbol that was his usual signature. The placement of the X's seemed to be random, but perhaps it wasn't.
When I first received this letter, I had it copied onto a piece of acetate so that it would be clear, and I took it and placed it over a map of San Francisco. I affixed the center point of the cross circle on the peak of Mount Diablo and continued to rotate the piece of acetate around until each one of these little X's on the circumference of the circle lined up with a scene relevant in the Zodiac case. Here's Mount Diablo. Here's the scene of the murder of Paul Stein at Washington and Cherry in San Francisco. If you look here, here are the scenes of the Lake Herman and Blue Rock Springs shootings, lined up perfectly with Mount Diablo. If I move this around some more, you'll see that the third X here lines up with Lake Berryessa.
And the patterns don't stop there.
There was something else that had occurred not only to me but also to the police and any number of people, and that was the role of water in the entire Zodiac episode. The first murder was in Riverside. There was one committed at the water's edge at Lake Berryessa, Lake Herman Road. In fact, when I went to look at the site where the cab driver was murdered, it was right next to a fire hydrant. So the thought passed through my mind that water might be a clue to his identity.
This connection to water led Penn to a suspect he is convinced is the Zodiac. Because the man has not been officially questioned by police, he will remain nameless. But according to Penn, He's an Ivy League lecturer and brilliant mathematician who planned that every letter and every murder follow a pattern of numbers and angles, creating a legacy of evil genius.
So many suspects, so many theories, one weirder than the next.
Was Arthur Lee Allen the Zodiac killer?
No, I'm certainly, most certainly not the Zodiac killer.
Was it Larry Kane, an unnamed Ivy League lecturer? Or could there have been more than one killer?
It seems to me that we have here a series of disparate crimes that don't have much in common aside from the fact that the same person has taken credit for all of them. We do know that one person wrote all of the letters. We also know that the letters were written by someone with insider's knowledge of the crime. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the person who wrote the letters committed all of those crimes. It strikes me as possible, for example, that he might have found someone to do his work for him, employed a sort of cat's paw to act on his behalf. This would help explain the anomaly of the murder of the cab driver, Paul Stein, where Zodiac clearly claimed credit for it, yet left physical evidence that did not fit any of the suspects. The handprint clearly was left by someone other than any of the people that the police picked up. Now, if Zodiac simply observed that crime, or actually sent someone to commit it on his behalf, that would explain the lack of physical evidence.
But who and why?
Well, let's say Arthur Lee Allen was in Riverside and for one reason or another killed Sherry Jo Bates. He learned two things from this. One was that it didn't bother him to kill, that he might in fact even have enjoyed it. He also found out that he enjoyed writing about it, and that he enjoyed the credit he got for it, even though it was anonymous, and thus he might want to have that happen again. Then a certain amount of time after having killed Sherry Jo Bates, it seems to me that one of two things would have happened. Either he found himself in a position to commit another murder, or he observed or learned about another murder and decided to take credit for it.
This is the Zodiac speaking. The police shall never catch me because I have been too clever for them. I look like the description passed out only when I do my thing. The rest of the time, I look entirely different. I shall not tell you what my disguise looks like when I kill.
Murder will out, they say. You can't get away with murder. That's true in the books I write, where dumb luck or brilliant deduction nails the killer in the last chapter. In the real world, it doesn't always work out that way. Some killers are acquitted. Others are never even arrested, never found out. Zodiac got away with murder. Or did he? Maybe the final chapter just hasn't been written yet.